Hey, welcome back for another edition of Whatcha Readin. Uh, this little segment here I try to do weekly answers a question I get frequently, which is basically what are you reading? What current comics are you reading? Very few current comics, but in general, people are curious about what a writer reads when he's not writing uh, or sleeping. So let's get to it. I finally tracked down at a reasonable price the second volume of Lawless. It's a collection of comics that appeared in either Judge Dredd magazine or 2000 AD. I'm not sure which. Um, and it's a terrific series by Dan Abnet and Phil Winslade. And it features a judge sent out to a distant planet. It's very much a space western, for lack of a better term. And it's obviously that was the intention. There's a lot of western movie tropes in it, and it's just a terrific series. Dan Abnett's always a reliably good writer, but here he's. I think this is the best thing he's ever written, which is really saying something. Because as I said, he's an accomplished comic writer, long time, rather prolific, um, and this everything about this is perfect as a science fiction adventure comic, and the characters are well drawn. I mean, they're well realized. They're believable. There's a lot of suspense, a lot of action, as you would expect in a 2000 AD comic. But there's also some humor, welcome humor. Some of it not even that dark. I mean, 2000 AD and Judge Dredd are known for their dark humor. Some of the humor is dark. Some of the humor is just funny. Stuff happens, based on characters. And I say humor, not comedy. There's a distinction. And of course, Phil Winslade. Um, Phil's an artist I've long admired. I only ever got to work with him one time. He's one of my favorites. And here he just this like Abnett. I think this is Phil's masterpiece. As you can see here, his richly illustrative style. Uh, I don't know what the page rates are over there, but they're not paying this guy enough. This artwork is jaw droppingly beautiful, and like I said, very illustrative. It moves beyond comic art to something else, and this has always been Phil's hallmark. This um, very detailed, very reality based style that he has. That's probably a lot more influenced by golden age of illustration artists than by comic artists. And but that said, he's also a fantastic storyteller. A lot of artists can bring the eye candy or they can tell a story. Um, the best can do both. Produce beautiful artwork that compels you to move forward through the story. So, Lawless, if you can find copies of it, I think it's up to 4 volumes now, and I will review the rest as I read them. But excellent stuff, my highest recommendation. Now, here's a book I wish I could highly recommend. I was really looking forward to reading this. It's Sergeant Rock versus the Army of the Dead, by actor Bruce Campbell and artist Ed Risso. And man, it was a real letdown. A real letdown. First of all, it's drawn in this sort of minimalist Mike Mignola style, which really isn't suited to a war-based comic book at all. Um, and that's where the problems just begin. Um, it's set in the closing days of World War II. Sergeant Rock and an unrecognizable Easy Company. There's only a couple of members that we would remember from Easy Company with him, Jackie Johnson and Bulldozer. Um, Campbell, for some reason, makes up new Easy Company members who are pretty forgettable. Um, Gorn or Wild Man and Ice Cream Soldier and Little Sure Shot and all those guys to be replaced by sort of generic GIs who don't really act at all like Easy Company members. Nothing about this will really remind you of Easy Company. even to Sergeant Rock smoking cigars. Bruce Campbell in his introduction admits that he read these comics as a kid, but apparently didn't go back and reread any because he seems to confuse Sergeant Rock with Sergeant Fury, both in personality and appearance. Um, you know, you know, Rock smoked Lucky Strikes. He didn't smoke cigars. I never saw uh, Sergeant Rock with a cigar ever. Um, and as I said, it's set in the closing days of World War II. Easy Company is in Germany, fighting their way toward Berlin, and there was some degree of historical accuracy in the old DC War comics, and that's all gone here. Easy Company pretty much enters Berlin without any problem. U.S. forces did not fight their way through Berlin. That was the Russians that fought their way through Berlin. And there are no Russians in this story. And of course, it presents a sort of wacky final days in Hitler's bunker, a wacky version of that bears no relationship to what actually happened in 1945. And it's a shame because the covers capture the old feel of the comics. As you can see here, this cover would have been, this cover art would have been very much at home in the 1970s on a 1970s DC war comic, and drawn by Russ Heath or Joe Kubert or somebody like that, and but I don't know. I really wanted to like this. The other thing that really annoyed me about it is they, first of all, there's a lot of anachronistic dialogue. I mean, just stuff no one back then would have said. Contemporary kind of dialogue. And the other thing that really bugged me is like science fiction weaponry is introduced. Easy Company is given weapons to go up against the zombies. In a story, I mean, I didn't even explain the plot line. Plot line's obvious from the title: Sergeant Rock versus zombies. You don't really need to know anymore. There really isn't much more of a plot than that. It's just a series of zombie encounters, one after the other, all ending in a bloody fashion. There's no rising suspense or subplots or complications or anything like that, which is fine in a zombie story if it were told better than this one was. And the other big problem I have is they give the guys these sci-fi weapons. They say, oh, these are weapons we've been doing research on. Some of them are weapons that still don't exist. So they're given these futuristic weapons. They're BARs and Tommy guns and Garans are taken away from them, and they're given these high-tech weapons. And I guess Bruce Campbell doesn't understand that the charm of a period zombie story is that everything remain in period. As a zombie story fan, if the zombies are showing up in medieval Europe, I want to see swords and crossbows versus zombies, not laser beams. And here, the gun nut thrill of seeing BARs and pineapple hand grenades and bazookas used against them is taken away by the replacement of these futuristic, made up phony baloney weapons. It's just nothing about this thing made any sense. This seems to be a project that probably grew out of consuming alcoholic beverages after hours at a convention, a chance meeting between Bruce Campbell and some editor at DC or DC executive. And this is the end result. And it's pretty sad. And like I said, I really, really wanted to like this. I was really looking forward to reading it. But it's just a huge letdown. Now, not a huge letdown is Backstory 4. If you watch my Ask Chuck Dixon shows, I recommend this book all the time when people talk about, what would you recommend a person read who wants to become a writer or to help with writing? The Backstory series is awesome. It's a series of books that interview screenwriters from the past. I mean, from the silent era to recent. And I never read Backstory 4. I realized I never read, the latest one in the series. So I picked it up and surprise, surprise, I read it. and it's got a lot of my favorite screenwriters from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s in it. And one of them, Larry Cohen. Larry Cohen he worked in television. He created the TV series Branded. Uh, and he worked in TV from the time he was like a teenager, writing for live television back for the networks back in New York. And he just a workaholic, prolific guy, just writing, writing, writing. And he wrote a number of really memorable 1970s low budget, no budget, shot on the fly horror films in the 70s. This guy had a strange career because he worked in like the lowest level B film programmer drive-in stuff, and he worked on A pictures, like cellular and phone booth. But he's a great high concept guy. The horror films he worked on were Q, if you've ever seen that one about the giant Aztec winged creature living in the Chrysler Building, and the It's Alive series, the movie The Stuff about a sentient the sentient dessert topping. You got to see that one to believe it. And he wrote a lot of black exploitation movies in the 70s. So very prolific writer director, and he had lots and lots of stories about breaking in and guerrilla filmmaking. He would never get permits to shoot in New York. He'd just go out there. Lots of people ended up in Larry Cohen movies that never knew they were in a movie. Another one was John Milius. I didn't learn a lot of new stuff from this one because I've read a lot of interviews with John Milius over the years. But Milius, if you don't know him, you probably know him as a comics fan, as the director of the first Conan the Barbarian movie. And but he did, Wind of the Lion, Dillinger. He wrote the screenplay for Apocalypse Now. His masterpiece, to my mind, Farewell of the King. He wrote and directed Red Dawn, the first version. Big Wednesday. This guy was part of the sort of filmmaking mafia that included George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and guys like that. But Milius never reached their heights of popularity, largely because he wasn't interested in that. He always said he was interested in making lots of money, but he would choose subject matter that he liked, that he was interested in, as opposed to what would necessarily be hugely commercially successful. The other thing he held him back was his open right-wing politics, and he admits that being a conservative, or as he would refer to himself, his political leanings in various different ways. I'm a barbarian nihilist, all this other stuff. He was very much like a libertarian, but he was a far right-wing guy, which leaks into his work. He doesn't, lecture you in his work, but his politics are apparent in his choice of subject matter and treatment of characters and things like that. This guy, there's nothing politically correct at all about anything that John Milius does. But he was in love with old Hollywood and that framework, and just an excellent filmmaker. And he reveals some stuff in the interview. But next one up was Elmore Leonard. Again, another guy I've read a lot of interviews with, so I didn't learn a whole lot of new stuff, except, he talks about, again, his frustration with Hollywood. It's run by idiots. It's run by committees. And as David Mamet points out, the committee's job is not to create, it's to assign blame. So he talks about, some positive, some negative experiences, and talks about the joy of writing, that his biggest kick is sitting in a room by himself making stuff up, and everything else is ancillary. How well the films do, or how well TV series or books do based on his work, is immaterial, other than the fact that they allowed him to continue writing, to continue justify having a career as a professional writer. But interesting, very interesting interview. Another interesting interview was Walter Hill, and for me the most interesting part of it was his involvement with the Alien franchise. He and David Giler completely rewrote the first Alien screenplay, uncredited, Writers Guild problems there. They couldn't get credit for it, but they did. They completely rewrote it. The original Alien screenplay is a mess, and they gleaned something from it. Strangely, Hill was not a science fiction fan, never set out to write science fiction, didn't care about science fiction, but he understood story. And if you don't know Walter Hill, you do know Walter Hill. He's 48 Hours, um, you know, a bunch of other, high action films, Extreme Prejudice, Hickey and Boggs, The Long Riders. But it was interesting, battling with the studios, uh, coming in to do rewrites and guiding this franchise because he produced the first four. He was producer on the first four Alien films and was involved in choosing cast members and screenwriters and doing lots of uncredited rewrites throughout. And he explains, where the franchise went right, where it went wrong, and it's an interesting insider view. Most interesting in this book was a pretty extensive interview with Donald E. Westlake. Donald E. Westlake is one of my absolute favorite writers of all time. He created the character Parker under the name Richard Stark. He created John Dortmunder, in a series of comedy caper novels, the most famous of which being The Hot Rock. And he also worked a lot in Hollywood, in television and movies, either script doctoring or writing original screenplays or adapting his own work. And he kind of goes through everything that he worked on or everything that was based on his work and what he thought of it. His favorite Parker movie is my favorite Parker movie, The Outfit. It's the closest to his work. But what was most interesting here was he talks about adapting Jim Thompson's The Grifters, which was made into an excellent film by Stephen Frears. And he talks about adapting it, and in it, he talks about Jim Thompson's work and what he liked about it and what he didn't like about it. And it really fascinated me because here's one of my favorite authors critiquing another of my favorite authors. And he said that what he didn't like about Jim Thompson was what I really liked about Jim Thompson, which was Thompson was an alcoholic. He wrote a lot of paperback originals, largely in the 50s. And he worked for the money. But he was a very good writer. And most importantly, he was a writer who had a lot of life experience. He had worked as a debt collector in the Depression. You got to be tough to be a debt collector when nobody has any money. He worked on wildcat oil rigs. I mean, all kinds of stuff this guy did. Working, blue collar, tough jobs or in tough environments. And it's all reflected in the work. And Westlake's complaint about Thompson's work is that he wouldn't go back and fix things. He wouldn't go back and do rewrites. So if he, Westlake gives the example, if Thompson's 3/4 of the way through his manuscript and realizes, oh, I should have mentioned this person had been married before. I really need the reader to know this character had been married before. And I didn't set that up early in the story. Well, he would just have the character mention in passing, I was married once, and say a few things about his previous marriage. And Westlake didn't like that. He says it was lazy. He should have gone back to the rewrite. But to me, it's what made Thompson's work seem to breathe and be real and be like a conversation, like a story somebody's telling you, like, oh, I forgot to tell you the car was red. That's important. So you're literally reading stream of conscious what's coming out of Thompson's mind and onto the typewriter keys. He's not doing rewrites. He's not massaging the material. This is coming out raw. And I think that's Thompson's charm. And I mean, I hate to say that Westlake kind of missed that because he's a fantastic writer, a better writer than I will ever be. But I do think he kind of missed it. I think his perfectionism as a working professional blinded him to what the average reader's experience is reading Jim Thompson. That there's a sense that it's raw and immediate. If you've ever read Thompson, I mean, his novels end in places that they're shocking, these shocking endings. I don't mean in an O. Henry or Alfred Hitchcock Presents way. I mean just in jaw dropping, like, oh my God, that's sick or demented or whatever. The way his novels end, and they're not gruesome or grisly. There's no purple prose. It's his choice of words. Cormac McCarthy is the only guy that comes close to Thompson for being able to create this vivid, horrifying images in your mind with very few words. And there's just unforgettable endings to his novels, for the most part. And I don't think that could have happened if Thompson didn't write the way he wrote. Just sort of wrote it, no rewrites, send off the first draft. That's it. This is what this is what I spewed out onto the page. Take it or leave it. And that's what I like about Thompson. And that's what made it really, really interesting. The other great thing about this book is an extensive interview with Lawrence Kasdan, who co-wrote the screenplay for Empire Strikes Back, wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark, wrote a number of the Big Chill, number of big hit movies. And Kasdan takes some heat from the interviewer about the movie Silverado. And if you know me, if you've been following my message board, if you from way back, or side remarks I make here on this channel, you'll know I don't like Silverado. I've never liked Silverado. I think Silverado is a steaming pile of crap. Now, if you have fond memories of it from when you were a kid, that's great. Don't go rewatch it again. Trust me. And Kasdan, he puts up with the questions from the interviewer and answers them all, and readily admits that this movie was a mess, that he overreached. He tried to include every Western trope, some of which were cut. People say, why weren't there more American Indians in it? Well, there were American Indian scenes, and they had to be cut for time. There was a cavalry charge in it. It had to be cut for time. He threw literally everything but the kitchen sink, the hitching post, and the barn door into this movie. And the results show he admitted there was no through story, no real through story. A lot of it relied too much on Western cliches. And the biggest thing that he admitted to was that there were lots and lots of subplots and character arcs that literally went nowhere. He didn't know where to take them, so he just didn't take them anywhere. So things begin, relationships begin, characters are introduced and vanish halfway through the story. And, the movie is a mess, and he admits to the mess. It was a mess and a huge failure. So I am vindicated. All you Silverado lovers, all you people who have attacked me over the years for not knowing what I was talking about. It turns out I did. Anyway. So that's it. I'll be back next week, hopefully, with more things I read. I just read the new David Mamet book, so I will definitely be reviewing that. Much in the same vein as the backstory thing, talking about inside Hollywood and little anecdotes and things like that. And his bitter view of the film industry. While I gotcha, Alpha Core is still out there. Alpha Core #1, it's selling briskly, and you can get it. I don't know if there's still signed copies by me left. I know they sold out all the CGCs, but I'll put the link down below here in comments. And of course, that is from the Rippaverse, which I'm doing more projects for. I've already completed a few, and I will be doing more in the new year. So that's it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and I will see all of you down the road.